What's going on, you guys? It is your boy, the American F1 fan, Eric Ringle here, and we are back with another tier list as the 2023 season has finally ended, and it's now time to rate the drivers that have competed in the 2023 season, and that's all 22 drivers that competed this year, as we had 2 extra drivers for AlphaTauri throughout the season, but we're going to rank all 22 drivers, so let's get on into this tier list now. So what we're going to do is we're going to start at the bottom of the point list and work our way all the way up to the top. So starting off, unfortunately, on the bottom of this tier list, we have to start with Nyck de Vries. Now, you'll see that I have 6 categories this time. Now, in American grading system, we go A, B, C, D, and then F is failing. But then we also have a category for incomplete. Now, there's going to be a couple drivers that will fall into this category, but I figured we might need to add this in there because we may just not have enough information to really make a judgment call. So first we start off with Nyck de Vries, and I really think that he deserves to be in the incomplete category. I said this when they changed drivers over to Daniel Ricciardo. I thought that it was way too soon for them to have literally dropped Nyck de Vries from the team. I think they wanted to give him too short of a leash, and I think they had maybe had second thoughts on the signing of the contract to begin with before the season even started. And then you just add in the fact that, he wasn't having the results that you would have liked him to have in the first several races of the season. That gave them all the reason in the world to get rid of Nyck de Vries. And I just think it's really unfair to grade him on those first 8 races, especially with what AlphaTauri was able to do throughout the season to improve that car. So now moving on to Logan Sargeant, and I really wanted the American to do so well this season. Now, yes, he did score a point, but let's be honest, it wasn't on track. It was after Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton got disqualified from Austin. That's when he got his first points of the season. Now, we have seen some improvements, towards the later half. Still not really where he needs to be. But I do kind of give him the benefit of the doubt because, again, he was another rookie coming into this Formula One season. But I have to grade on what he's done this season. He was one of the worst when it came to, costing the team large amounts of money. He cost the team over $4 million this season. So right now, unfortunately, until Logan Sargeant can prove himself, going into 2024, and he proves himself to be better, right now, Logan Sargeant is failing. Now we move over to Liam Lawson from AlphaTauri. He's one of the drivers that filled in for the team. He filled in while Daniel Ricciardo was out with the broken hand and the surgery that he had. Liam Lawson did an amazing job filling in for Daniel Ricciardo. I think the team really didn't expect much. They just wanted somebody that was going to be able to, kind of hold down the ship till Daniel Ricciardo got back. Really didn't cost the team too much in the way of money. Didn't have any foolish crashes or whatnot. But Liam Lawson scored 2 points, and those proved to be very vital towards the end of the season. And it gave him a chance at 7th and 6th in the championship, but I think have you given Liam Lawson a full season in this seat? I was really kind of surprised that they didn't give him the full season in the seat because he is a Red Bull Junior Academy driver, and Liam Lawson has proven in other categories of what type of race driver he is. So I'm going to give him an incomplete grade here because I feel like this season, had he been given a full season, we would have really been able to judge, what kind of driver he was going to be this season. Next, we move over to Kevin Magnussen at Haas, and as you saw my tier list when it came to teams, I think even Kevin will rightly admit this season was a failure for him. I think he was obviously better than Logan Sargeant because we saw glimpses of what Kevin can do on the track. But again, in the Haas, where, their upgrades went, basically belly up, and They ended up as a team that, was looking to potentially fight more towards the midfield. Their car ended up being the crappiest car on the grid when it came to upgrades and everything. And there were times that Magnussen dragged that car to places it shouldn't have been. But still, unfortunately, Kevin Magnussen gets a failing grade this season. Next, we move to Guanyu Zhou. And I really, truly think this was a season that he really needed to prove himself at Alfa Romeo. And going into 2024, it's going to be Sauber. And he just didn't prove himself enough for what he was, what he had done the prior 2 seasons, to all of a sudden, I think, truly take a step back. I mean, he scored points this season, but not nearly as well as he did last year. And yeah, part of it's to, Alfa Romeo and, really upgrading the car. But I mean, truly, we expected a lot more from Guanyu Zhou, especially with you now having the F2 champion and Theo Pourchaire basically sitting there waiting for a seat in Formula One. You really needed to prove yourself, and I just don't think Guanyu Zhou did it, and I'm going to rate him as an F as well. Next up, we have Daniel Ricciardo, who stepped up into the team after the team AlphaTauri fired Nyck de Vries, and again, I think he wasn't to blame in the situation. We know that AlphaTauri and Red Bull were trying to figure out if he, could potentially step into the Red Bull car next season if they didn't want to keep Sergio Perez. But did very well for AlphaTauri. I mean, qualified 4th in Mexico after coming back from the injuries that he had at Zandvoort earlier in the season. I think he did a really good job again, but I can't give him a full grade this season. I think he was better than Liam Lawson. I think he was better than Nyck de Vries. But again, like I said, I truly think that one of these guys should have gotten the full season drive from the get-go to really gauge, where the team was at. Next, we move to Nico Hulkenberg at Haas. Now, I have to admit, I think there were a lot of people that were thinking that, Nico was going to come back in this season. He wasn't going to really, he was going to have to get reaccustomed to Formula One again. He was going to have to get reaccustomed to driving cars and driving this particular car. Nico stepped in and did an amazing job with the shit car that Haas gave him this season. Several times had qualified that car way up higher than it should have ever been. He qualified 2nd in Canada, but then, got a grid penalty there. I mean, he showed some true talent through the season in a crap Haas car that was going nowhere and going nowhere quick. And, he was able to score 9 points this season for Haas. Granted, they finished last in the constructor standings, but I think for him coming back to Formula One full-time for the first time in 2 years, he really decided to prove himself huge in this season, and I'm going to give him an average grade here. For what he was given in the vehicle and for what he was able to accomplish with all the great qualifying sessions, out-qualifying Kevin Magnussen, who this was his 2nd season back at Haas, and Nico was out-qualifying him almost on a regular basis. That was a pretty good job from Nico. Next, we move to Valtteri Bottas. Again, Alfa Romeo was this team that it was nowhere all season. And I think even Valtteri would admit this season was a pretty big failure for him. I think he was better than Guanyu Zhou. I would say they were probably just about even though Valtteri scored more points than him. I still think that for Alfa Romeo and for where they were, towards the end of last season and now taking a huge step back again this season, I just think Valtteri, again, with Theo Pourchaire waiting in the wings for an F1 seat, you really needed to see a huge step forward at the team, and Valtteri was supposed to be the guy that leads it, and he just didn't show that this year, so I would give Valtteri an F. Yuki Tsunoda up next, and Yuki, what a season for him. I made predictions at the beginning of this season, and I truly thought this was I'm glad to be wrong, but I thought Yuki was going to be the first driver to be, thrown out of a team and, basically thrown out of F1 this season. And boy, did Yuki prove me wrong this year. He really showed that when he's given a good car, that he can really do amazing things. I mean, even look at Abu Dhabi, on pure, I don't know what you would call it, luck, chance, pit stops, whatever. He was able to get that car to lead the Formula One Grand Prix, which you don't see AlphaTauri leading Grand Prix that often. And I mean, he scored 17 points this season, basically led AlphaTauri to almost getting, a top 6 in the standings, top 7. He really got this car going, and I would give Yuki a B this season. He really showed the progression he's made since he's been a rookie, and he's starting to show himself as a leader at AlphaTauri. Next up on the list is Alex Albon, and holy crap. He is showing, I think, the talent that Red Bull knew he had. Just unfortunately, he was so young at the time, and to pair him up with a Max Verstappen in a car that really is molded to Max Verstappen's liking, I mean, he's really showing the skill that I think a lot of us knew he had going into Formula One. And I would say that Alex, in a Williams car, mind you, that literally every expert, pundit, me, everybody had that car sitting dead last compared to last season. They didn't look like they had improved any throughout last season. And coming into this year, we were like, what's to say they're going to have anything different? We saw qualifying after qualifying where he'd make it to Q3 on a pretty decent basis and really put a Williams car that, was midfield, probably lower tier at the beginning of the season. He got that car so improved that they were able to finish almost in the first half of the constructor standings. I got to give Alex Albon an A. So moving on next to Esteban Ocon, I think he had a really good season this year. But for an Alpine that was supposed to be taking another step forward this year, especially losing Fernando Alonso in the offseason, they were supposed to have fixed the reliability issues. They were supposed to basically, they were going to prove why Fernando shouldn't have left the team. And yeah, Esteban had some really good results this year, but Alpine as a team had some really just blooperish moments this season, like in Australia, where they crashed each other out. And, it really showed that there's still a lot to work towards with Esteban. And really, he should have been the leader at this team this season because he knew the car so well. And I just can't see that. I'm not going to say he's failing, and I don't necessarily... I would say he's a D. I'm going to say he's ahead of Nico Hulkenberg. You know what? I'm going to do this. Because even though I love Nico to death, and I felt like he had a really good season, I'm going to move Nico down to a D. Excuse me. But I really, truly thought Nico did a great job at Haas, but Esteban was just really average this year. Moving next to Pierre Gasly, who moved over from AlphaTauri to Alpine, proves to be a really good move in the long run for Pierre, and was able to step into that car almost immediately and start putting up results when they needed it. Alpine's just got a huge disadvantage in that car with the engine. They just weren't able to improve that engine enough to, compare it to the likes of the Red Bull engine or the Ferrari or the Mercedes. And they tried to come up with rules going into next season that would allow, maybe some evening out to come on so that, Alpine would, at least make a little bit more step closer to the rest of the field. And that ended up not happening, but Pierre did a really good job this season, and I would rate him at a B for somebody that didn't know, what to really expect going into Alpine this year. I would truly say, and I'll rate him ahead of Yuki, based on points and a lot of other stuff. But I think Pierre, basically hit the ground running once he got to Alpine and really showed himself to be the leader. And for everybody that was going to say that Pierre was going to cause issues with Esteban Ocon this season, he did a really good job, and they showed that their issues are in the past. So moving on next, we move over to Lance Stroll. And, for an Aston Martin team that we saw in the very early beginnings of the season, putting up these podium finishes from Fernando Alonso, but then when you would look, Lance was fighting for like the bottom end of the points. It was really it was really disheartening to see Lance take such a huge step back, and there were times it almost felt like to me that Lance was just, his mind was elsewhere. It wasn't on Formula One, and he just didn't want to be there any longer, or he just wasn't having any fun. And I get it. His dad owns the team, and, you kind of, you're stuck, with a dad that's basically being the overbearing soccer dad. Basically you're the over excited, sport dad that, wants your son to do well, but like just puts so much pressure on you. And I think we've seen that a lot at Aston Martin with Lance Stroll. I'm going to rate him. He did score 74 points. Excuse me, but I'm going to say he's a C, but I can also see why you would say he's a D if you were to really look at it compared to Fernando Alonso this season and where Fernando finished in the points and where he was able to get that car throughout the season. Lance really screwed the pooch this year. Moving over to Oscar Piastri, and another one of the season predictions I got wrong this season. I thought the moving over to McLaren for Oscar Piastri and all the theatrics that came with it was going to create an issue and just going to put too much pressure on his back. And boy, was I wrong. Oscar really did a fantastic job this season. Won a sprint race this year. Won one more race than his team or his teammate Lando Norris. I would have to say that he goes ahead of Alex. I'm going to say he goes ahead of Alex. I think Oscar really did a good job and is showing what the future of Formula One is going to be. When we lose the likes of Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen and some of the older guys that are on the grid, we're going to start to see an Oscar Piastri that's going to put out top-tier performances week after week. Moving over to George Russell now. George, I think, even readily admits that this season was a little bit tougher for him. Was kind of a regression back. Obviously, Lewis finished ahead of him in the standings this year. George still had a good season by most standards. But really took a step back this year, and I think it's not necessarily all on him. A lot of it, and even Mercedes will readily admit that the updates that they brought to the car and the car that they brought into the 2024 season was trash, and they just couldn't get a handle on it all throughout the season. Every time they thought they figured out something with the car, it would take two steps back, and you could just see it throughout the season. And I think that really hurt George Russell and his evolution in Formula One and his evolution at Mercedes. So if I were going to grade him, and I'm sure he would probably feel this way, he would go, I would say, based on his performance, I feel like he would be at a C. I'm gonna say he's ahead of He's ahead of Esteban Ocon, but I think he was very, very average this year. So moving on next to Carlos Sainz from Ferrari, and Ferrari even fully, truly knows that their car was just good over one lap pace at times, but then, just couldn't perform in the race. And I still think Ferrari is hurt by the fact that they don't have a labeled number one driver, even though we know in our heart of hearts that Charles Leclerc is the number one driver. I think that Carlos at times still feels like that he could be the number one driver at Ferrari, when I think we all know that Charles is the much, younger, more skilled driver than Carlos. Not to say that Carlos is bad. It's just Charles is the guy, was the guy, coming up through the ranks and was basically slated to be that new number one driver at Ferrari. But still, there were times, and I mean, Carlos Sainz is the only non-Red Bull driver to win this season. I think that deserves an A on just principle alone. The fact that he was the only driver not from Red Bull to win a race during this calendar season, that gets an A. Moving over to Lando Norris now. Lando Norris, I think, showed some real improvement this season. It sucks that he didn't win a race. He was qualifying very, very well. And, Red Bull just had everybody's number this season. But Lando really put on a good performance, especially, once McLaren brought their B-spec car a couple races into the season. McLaren really, really, really showed what that team is going to be, going into 2024. Now, hopefully they don't take a step back in 2024. But Lando really proved himself, and I would say Lando gets an A. Now moving over to Charles Leclerc at Ferrari, and for what we expected Ferrari to be in this season, and to really bring the fight to Red Bull, it was heartbreaking, I think, for Ferrari fans to see that Leclerc just couldn't bring that fight all throughout the season. Now we saw glimpses of it this year, but then I think we also saw the glimpses of, where Ferrari is lacking when it comes to the car. And again, he's the number one driver at Ferrari, even though they won't ever put that label on both drivers. He's the number one guy, and I truly don't understand what Ferrari is doing with Charles Leclerc and what they could be doing with that car and with Charles Leclerc. So if I were to grade Charles, I would put him at a B this season compared to what he really should have been this year. I would say it was a huge disappointment, and I would call it a B for Charles. So moving on next to Fernando Alonso, I could not say any more great things about Fernando this season. I'm giving him an A. I'm gonna move Alex to a B, and this is no slight on him. He did a really good job this season. He's behind Charles, but Fernando did such an amazing job this year, because I'm giving too many people A's at this point. So I'm going to give Alex a B. But Fernando, to basically put the Aston Martin where he did, when I don't think anybody on the Formula One grid thought for Aston Martin, let alone Fernando Alonso, they didn't think they had any kind of a car going into the season. For Fernando to score podium after podium after podium at the beginning of the season. Now, granted, towards the end, Aston Martin kind of fell off, with some of the upgrades that they did. They went the wrong direction, and it really hurt the team, and it kind of hurt Fernando. But I think in the grand scheme of things, to have, Fernando Alonso for a good majority of the season was trying to chase down the Red Bulls and was keeping it at least close, did a really good job with an Aston Martin car that wasn't expected to do much. So moving on to Lewis Hamilton, this was a huge comeback season for Lewis. I'm going to give him an A, but I'm going to put him behind Fernando, because I still think he did an amazing job this season, but I think, Lewis with the resurgent season, it was almost expected that he was going to have this resurgent season. Like, it literally, from all the pundits that we heard that talked Formula One, they were like, oh, Lewis is going to have a return to form this season, really going to put the fight on. And I mean, he did, don't get me wrong. I mean, he finished, third in the driver's standings. He did a really amazing job with the Mercedes that, lacked in the development department, the, wherewithal to really improve that team, and basically have them fighting for the titles of both the drivers and constructors. Now moving on to Sergio Perez, and I want to be able to give him an A or B, but it's really hard for me to give him either or. And I like Sergio. Sergio's a guy that, I kind of got behind when, we really didn't have any Formula One drivers from the United States. Sergio was the closest thing that we could get to a Formula One driver. But he showed such a regression this season at Red Bull. I mean, there was talks that he was going to get released from Red Bull in the middle of the season. Then they said that they weren't going to give him a seat for 2024. Now, granted, he's got that seat now, but I think, for all the pressure that gets shoved on him, it's unfair to a certain extent because obviously Red Bull develops their car around what Max Verstappen wants. And, the feedback that Max gives, that's how they update the Red Bull. Now, this season they didn't update it a whole lot, but, Max had the basic say as to what direction the Red Bull was going. And, I think that hurt Sergio in some ways this season, but also Sergio really didn't do himself any favors in several races this season. Mexico comes to mind, knocking himself out on lap 1 at his home Grand Prix. That's pretty bad. And now moving on to Max Verstappen, I'm going to give him an F. We'll start. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. Obviously, Max gets an A. I mean, just absolutely dominated the Formula One grid this season. Like, it was night and day between Max Verstappen and the rest of that grid. He is right now proving himself to be a future Hall of Famer in Formula One, and is going to potentially chase down Lewis Hamilton and, for drivers' titles and, chase down Michael Schumacher and all the greats in the sport. He's got a really good shot at chasing these guys down. And for what he did this season, absolutely deserves an A. But guys, this is my tier list. I'm just going to kind of give it one last little look, see if I want to make any changes. Man, I'm going to move Lance. This is going to be the only move because I've been sitting here and I kept looking at him. I'm going to say Lance is a D, just in front of Nico. Really should have been able to do more with that car at Aston Martin for, especially in the very early stages of the season. Really thought he should have done more. But guys, this is my tier list. Let me know in the comment section down below what you guys think of my tier list, where I got it wrong, where I got it right. Let me know that in the comment section down below, guys. As always, please slap a like on these videos. It helps this video get out to more and more Formula One fans. So please hit that like button. And if you guys are new to my channel, please hit that subscribe button. Nearly to 360, trying to get to 500 before the end of the season, or before the end of the year. So guys, please, if you're new to my channel, hit that subscribe button. We've got more Formula One content during this off season on the way. But guys, thank you so much for watching this video. And guys, for the American F1 fan, I'm Eric Ringel, signing off.